This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this meeting of the Wichita Sedgwick County Advanced Plans Committee. Called the meeting to order, and I would like to do a roll call to make sure we can see and hear everyone who's present. I'm present. Chuck Warren. Joe Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Duell.
Here.
Mr. Hartman.
Here.
Ms. Miles. Not present. And Mr. McKay.
Here.
Thank you for joining us today. I would entertain a action on the previous meeting summary, which you received in advance of the meeting.
Move for approval.
Simultaneous move to approval. We'll take the motion from Mr. Warren and the second from Mr. Johnson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Hearing none, the meeting summary is approved as submitted. Today we have the exciting action of hearing the capital improvements program from the city of Wichita for the years 23 to 32. Do you have comments, Mary? Okay, great. Mary Hunt
to make a couple, just a couple comments. We've been working with the city for, every year on the CIP. Today we have a budget analyst, Zach Kramka, joining us to make the presentation on behalf of the finance department. And just to point out that Stephen Banks will be coming up here in a minute just to talk about the evaluation analysis that he did on the CIP that they've put together, and then we'll hand it off to Zach. All right, thank you.
Glad to have you, Zach and Stephen.
Good morning, commissioners. We're asking a couple of things from you this morning. One, the finding of the CIP having significant overall conformity with the comprehensive plan, and also that the conformity could be increased by allocating more funding to maintenance of existing infrastructure. It is a requirement of Kansas statute that the capital improvement program be presented to the Planning Commission for approval as being in conformity with the comprehensive plan. The city of Wichita prepares a 10-year CIP, and the community investment plan identifies vision, core community values, and guiding policy principles to help set relative priorities for future public infrastructure and facility investments or facility decisions. And there are 5 principles relating to that that you're all familiar with: supporting an innovative, vibrant, diverse economy, investing in the quality of our community life, taking better care of what we have, and making strategic value-added investments, and providing for balanced growth. The attached spreadsheet that you receive divides the aggregated CIP within categories of transportation, water, sewer, and stormwater, arts, culture, and recreation, public safety, and other. In addition to the categories above, this analysis reviews the level of investment proposed in the established central area. And again, overall, our conclusion is the draft CIP has significant conformity. In the established central area, which is designated as having a desire to create a more walkable development pattern in the core of the community. The creation of the Wichita Urban Infill Strategy was part of that, and something we're still pursuing. But the established central area is 40% of Wichita's land area. It's also 52% of the population according to the 2020 census. And the proposed CIP allocates 34% of total funding to the established central area. So 10 to 20% below those core statistic values. Given the deteriorated condition of existing infrastructure in the ECA, additional CIP funding for maintenance and infrastructure would be more in conformity with the comprehensive plan. And that is part of priority number 5, provide for balanced growth with added focus on our established neighborhoods. Under transportation, which includes airports, bridges, freeways, streets, and transit, the CIP maintains balance of projects. 45% of the funding of streets, let's see, it's 45% of funding in the streets categories to the comprehensive plan's lowest priority, which is expanding the street system, but it does have 32% of funding going to enhancing what we already have and 24% going toward maintaining what we have for a total of 56%. The proposed CIP would decrease the percentage of funding program for street maintenance compared to the 2022 to 2031 CIP. And that is much due to the next bullet, where 69% of the local sales tax dollars is going to funding the freeway system expansion. That has to do with the Kellogg expansions that KDOT is undertaking to the east and west, but that does require a city match. So I would say at least we're ahead in that KDOT is taking up the responsibility it should have had with Kellogg years ago. But we are getting a good bang for a buck in relation to that investment, not having to pay for the whole thing like we have in the past. For water, sewer, and stormwater, the CIP allocates a majority to maintenance of existing infrastructure. Stormwater funding, though, could see more funding. They have actually very minimal funding at this point. And so that is a weakness that we would really like to see brought in greater conformity. For arts and culture, 51% of the CIP is allocated to existing infrastructure, and the majority of park and open space is allocated to maintaining and enhancing existing parks. For public safety, 90% of the fire facilities are the allocation for those is for maintenance of existing structures, and similarly for police substations, 90% of those are in the ECA, and 97% of those projects are for replacing what we already have. In the other category, again, 97% going to maintaining existing infrastructure. So we'll be asking you to, one, find the CIP has significant overall conformity, but that conformity could be increased by allocating more maintenance to existing infrastructure, especially in the CIP. Any questions?
John, go ahead. Microphone, please.
when we got the presentation, 2 or 3 months ago about Delano and then moving the transit center over to that area, is this taking into consideration that part of the transit budget? Yeah.
It does. A lot of that is federal funding again. It is occurring in the ECA. That would be kind of an expansion, but it is going to be a replacement for the existing transit center. So it's going to move a bunch of that operation over to the Delano area.
Other questions for Stephen at this point? He'll still be in the room if something comes up after we hear Zach. Zach, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, commissioners. My name is Zach Krampke and I work in the finance department. I'm really happy to be with you today to talk about the CIP, one of my big things that I work on. I'm just going to run through a few slides for you. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt or we can take them at the end, whatever you prefer. I'm happy to accommodate. We can go to the next slide, please. So overall, the CIP is a 10-year, $2.4 billion plan. It's 10 years, but we redo it every year, so it's a rolling update. And the point of this slide is really you can see kind of the things that go into the process. And really this starts all the way back in January. I would argue I work a little bit to get ready for next year already in the fall, but the main stuff happens in January. You can see community investments plan is a really big component of the development of the CIP, as well as the city council mission and goals that really breathes life into everything we do at the city of Wichita. Some other things that also play a pretty big role. There's a CIP administrative committee that rigorously vets a lot of projects, and part of that vetting is priority score. Every project idea is scored and forwarded to the committee. City council policy direction. So yeah, we have their overall mission and goals, but there's also room for the council to make decisions in the process. And then everything we do in finance also includes citizen feedback, both informally, but also more formal situations like we're here today in front of you guys. Next slide. So this pie chart just shows the revenue side of the CIP. And as I said before, it's $2.4 billion about. One thing that I like to point out is that the proportion of the revenue for the CIP that is really the property taxes, that GO, it's a significant portion, but it's also not a significant portion. I mean, you can see it's about $311 million over 10 years, and that pays for things like parks and public safety, public facilities. But a huge chunk of the CIP is utility projects, airport projects. Mr. Wadle. Sure. So this is the GO section right here. I don't know if that...
We lose a mic. Can you still hear him online?
No.
What if I move the cursor? Yeah, that works. Sorry, this is GO right here, and it's about $311 million. This is sales tax, 434. And then these two are the utilities. This is sewer, that's at 500 million, water at 300 million. And yeah, all of these components add up to the entirety of the CIP. Next slide, please. So I showed you the revenue. This is expense. And again, my point still stands that a bunch of the expense of this is utility projects. Here's sewer, water is right here. And then we also have a big special assessment program. And then when we get to public safety, public facilities, park and recreation, heavy equipment, this is that GO. We do have some other funding sources, but a lot of that's GO. And then streets is obviously a huge component of the CIP, and a lot of that is sales tax. Some of it's GO, but that's over 450 million. Next slide, please. So this chart really kind of sums up why we're here today to talk about the conformity with the Community Investments Plan. The plan, as you're well aware, lays out 3 major priorities, the top being maintain what we currently have. Next priority is enhance, and then the third priority is expand. And on the right-hand column there, you can just see the percentage of the entire CIP that's devoted to each of those priority areas. And the plurality of that is to maintain what we currently have, which is good. We want to make sure that's the largest spending category without question. Next slide, please. So this is a slightly different chart. In addition to maintain, enhance, expand, the comp plan lays out other priority areas, very high, medium, high, low, medium, as it relates to the sections of the CIP like streets, bridges, transit. And I guess what I would observe here for you all is you can see that 3/4 of the CIP is either in very high or high, which again, that's really important. And those are things like public safety, streets, and water. Those are really critical components of the CIP. Next slide, please. So now I just want to spend the balance of my time and just highlight a few policy decisions areas that have really been important in the development of this year's document. First of which being pavement maintenance. This is something that we constantly hear from the community that we really want to make sure that we maintain our roads. And that's maintained a priority historically and to this day. On the left-hand side, that money is the allocation towards just general pavement maintenance, 141 million over 10 years. Stephen is correct that that is a little bit of a decrease from the last year's CIP. And the reasoning behind that is because the City Council this year made a pretty big policy decision to prioritize, in addition to maintaining existing roads, but they also want to prioritize paving dirt streets in neighborhoods. So right now there's about 167 lane miles of dirt streets in the city of Wichita, many of which are really in areas that would be pretty difficult for the people who live there to go through the traditional special assessment process to then have their streets paved. And so this is an effort on behalf of the City Council to try to address that. And what they did is they allocated 31 million over 10 years. And the estimate right now is that that would be able to pave about 41 miles of those 167. The general plan so far is to first focus on paving dirt streets that are within 1 block of a school. And that has a lot to do with dust mitigation as a high priority of the council. And so that'll be the first couple years of funding. And then once that's taken care of, the plan is to move into those lowest income areas of the city that again probably are not in position to go through the traditional special assessment process to pave their streets. Next slide, please. So this is just to highlight the shift that has happened with LST funding. Again, as we are all well aware, a lot of that funding traditionally in recent history has gone to completing Kellogg. And a lot of that work has been completed. Of course, there's plans to keep expanding in the future potentially. But the majority of work in this CIP related to Kellogg is outside funding. It's not the just complete sales tax funding like it has in the past. They do require some matches, local matches, and so that's what's being provided here. But again, a lot of the LST funding has shifted from freeways. Now it's moving into those streets and bridges, arterials throughout the city. Next slide, please. So keeping Wichita safe, that's part of our mission and goals. 150 million in public safety improvements, and most of this is GO funding. There are 3 police station replacements in the CIP. The 4th is currently in progress. Patrol East they're getting ready to start digging in the ground for that. And then the other police stations are also planned to be replaced throughout the planning period. There's 45 million for 9 fire stations. This is an increase over last year. There was money for 6 fire stations, I believe. And this could be the majority of these fire stations will replace a handful of our 22 stations. There is a chance we may bump up to 23 fire stations, but that's still being worked out as the fire department does some data analysis with a outside vendor. And then we put fire trucks on there. That's a big expense, and that's something we're really proud of. We maintain a great replacement schedule with our fire apparatus, and that is holding true in the CIP this year. Next slide, please. So you may recall that beginning of this year, end of last year, the city underwent a transition to contracted management of Century 2. And this is an iconic community asset that we have. The city still owns and maintains the building. And Public Works facility staff have been working really closely the past couple of months with ASM Global, the operator of the building, to identify what are some key maintenance needs that need to be taken care of to bring the facility up to a new standard that really will serve us well into the future. And they identified about $18.5 million worth of work that needs to be done. And so that's funded over 10 years, but the bulk of it, over half of it, is going to come in 2023. And some of the big projects are going to be to replace the blue roof. There's some HVAC improvements that need to be done, as well as other life safety ADA systems, improvements to lifts and elevators. So that is something that we're really excited about, and it's worth highlighting. Next slide, please. Stephen mentioned a little bit about stormwater, and we did want to, this is exactly the same slide that we talked about to this group last year, but the Dry Creek project has been a really high priority. I believe that is in the ECA, serious flooding problems. And there's $36 million scheduled of improvements to address that. And I believe that has already started, and it will be ongoing, but this has been a really high priority over the years, and the CIP is committed to providing the resources to address it. Next slide, please. Just a few park and library comments. Dog parks have become a really high priority of the City Council. So there's over $1 million to one dog park. Is Country Acres is going to get a dog park, which is great. There's not a dog park in District 5 right now, even though there are a lot of dog owners. And then I think the next dog park after that, I can't remember if it's 23 or 24, is there's going to be some improvements to Meridian Dog Park in District 6. We have funding to contribute to portions of the CLAP master plan, and then over $6 million to improve 4 branch libraries: Westlink, Angelou, Rockwell, and I'm forgetting Alford. Thank you, Alford. And so those are things worth highlighting. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit about where we've been and where we're going. The manager presented the CIP to the City Council alongside the operating budget in July. And obviously I'm here today to talk to you guys. We're scheduled to take the CIP to the full Planning Commission August 18th. And right now the plan is for the council to adopt the CIP and the operating budget on August 23rd. Next slide, please. So first of all, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your planning staff and they'll get in contact with me or anyone else at the finance department. But the CIP is also available online. You can stick your phone in front of that QR code and it'll take you to it. If you want to go visit the library to see a physical copy, they're available at every library, as well as you can come to City Hall and we can help you. But yeah, that's, again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And one more slide. that's kind of the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Right. Thank you. And here's your first question. Go ahead.
Excuse me, on projects. The first is the old library next to Century 2. Does the city have any plans for that building at this point?
Thankfully, the finance director just walked in, and I'm going to defer to him. That's a great question.
Good morning, everyone. Mark Manning with the Finance Department. First of all, I'm sorry I had a conflict. The manager assigned me something else. I asked Zach to fill in. Zach is the one that does all the work on the CIP. You see me every year. He's the one that's working late hours doing all the work. So he's very, very familiar with it. The best answer I can give you to your question is there's been a lot of discussion about it, but we don't have any specific money in the CIP specifically for that library. I know that's kind of a wiffly waffly answer, but that's the best answer I can give you. So.
My second question has to do with the money in the budget for the Clapp Park. Is kind of a after the fact question, but I wonder if the city still feels like spending $9 million on that is a better option than keeping that open as a golf course.
Yeah, that's a great question.
You're on a roll today. That's all I can say.
Great question. I'll give you my perspective because I've worked with golf for the last 25 years. We had overcapacity. I mean, we're very fortunate, and the pandemic, ironically, was the best thing that ever happened to golf. Who would have thought that? We wouldn't have thought that, but it turned out it was. But I would tell you from my perspective, yes, we had too much golf capacity. We want golf to be sustainable for the long term, not just for now when we're doing great. So yes, I think that was a correct decision to close it and convert it into a park.
Yes.
Yeah, piggybacking on that, what is the 9 million going towards for the Clapp Park?
Yeah, so I know the immediate needs, there are some safety concerns with some of the bridges that are in the park, and that's going to cost a lot of money to remove. But you know, so a lot of the initial spending is going to be to prep the area for the development of the entire plan. I believe that plan is available online on the park website if you're curious about what is planned for the park. But the immediate plan is to make sure the area is safe and ready to develop the land.
Other questions I also want to note, I see Cindy Miles has joined us, so will be present for the remainder of the meeting. Any questions from those of you participating online?
No, I didn't hear an answer on the library, on the old library.
Yeah, so there aren't plans immediately that are firmed up about what's going to happen there. There is no money in the CIP currently to put towards that facility.
Any chance of selling it? I mean, I'd be interested in buying it. I'd be interested in giving it to me for $1.
I'll raise that to 150.
Wow. Wow.
I'd use it to house nonprofit organizations. Does that help?
I appreciate that.
Can I ask a question? This is Joe. Is there money in the budget to maintain it?
There's still operating money to maintain that building, certainly. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
No, I was just asking if there's money to maintain it. That's all.
Thank you. Mary?
My question had to do with Bleckley Street and the flooding there. What exactly will they do to alleviate that? Maybe Mr.
I think Mr. Gunzelman could answer.
We do have an RFP on the street right now that I think responses are due back August 12th, I believe. So we will be asking the consultant that we will hire for that work to do some proposed routing feasibility and right-of-way impacts that could happen, evaluation of franchise utilities in that area, and some other things. So my belief is we'll put a box there. However, I think we have some restrictions going under Kellogg that might restrict the size of that box. But we are just now getting, like I say, we have the RFP on the street now, and responses are due back August 12th. So hopefully we'll know more as we go through that process. The conceptual design will be due later this year, and then working on to final plans and estimate due early in 2024.
Thank you.
I have a question about the sales tax revenue. I think the thing that really struck me was that 69% of the sales tax funding goes to expand the freeway so we can get somewhere a minute faster. Is that tax specifically tied to freeway expansion so that it has to be used for that, or is there some discretion in the allocation?
Yeah, so the ordinance was, or there was a county-wide sales tax that was passed by the voters, and we get a portion of that money. Some of it goes to general fund relief for property taxes, and then a portion of that is used for capital projects, and it can be used for freeways, bridges, or streets. And so, I hope that my slide illustrated a little bit about how, previously it was almost exclusively going to Kellogg, and there really has been a shift over the last couple of years now that much of Kellogg's been improved. So it's something that we're working on for sure, but there is some limits. Some of it goes to the general fund, which is, operating budget, but there are limits to what we can spend that money on the capital side.
Thank you. That answers my question. Other questions, Mr. Warren?
The aspect of the plan that deals with fire stations, as the city expands, and because of that, the county or other cities contract, is there a plan on long-range plan as to how this transition from city to county for fire service is going to happen?
Sure. So what I can tell you is the fire department is finishing up a lot of predictive analytics work, is what they're terming, with a outside vendor and software system that will help them determine strategically how should we reposition personnel, apparatus, and where do our facilities need to be located. And like I said, there's money for 9 stations in the CIP, most of which will be replacing current stations because some of them are in rough shape. But there may be 1 or 2 that are brand new stations because of the coverage constraints, especially out west with several of the barriers between Kellogg and the big ditch. It makes it tough to quickly get to where we're trying to go. So they're trying to improve coverage out there in the outlying areas, and I guess that's the best answer I can give you.
All right, a lot of information, a lot of projects, and appreciate Zach that we got to hear from you, who does the work at the grindstone level.
Thanks so much for your time.
I'm glad your director allowed you to come up from undercover.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. So we need to take action on this, a recommendation that the full MAPC would hear this material, but also that we would be making a recommendation to increase the allocation for maintenance of existing infrastructure proportionally. Is that an accurate representation?
Increasing the proportion of funding, it would be nice, but it's not what we're asking today. Today, we're asking you, have they made the case that this is consistent with the comprehensive plan, yes or no? And that with that, it would go forward to the MAPC on August 18th.
I'm sorry to join in here, but I think the clarification is that just what it states on here, that the the Advanced Plan Committee recommend that the MAPC make the following finding: that the draft CIP is significant overall conformity with comprehensive plan. So therefore, you're finding it's in conformance, and that conformity could be increased by allocating additional funding to maintenance of existing infrastructure. So you're not actually recommending that they increase it, but just simply making a note, hey, in the future, additional points, basically, if maintenance is increased.
I'm making that exact motion, word for word.
Thank you, Cindy. And Mr. McKay has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. The recommendation, exactly as stated in Stephen's document, has been approved by the committee. And again, Cindy's on that vote. Okie doke. Now I've stacked everything on my agenda. Okay, now Stephen has a comprehensive plan update, which we expect to take the majority of the balance of our meeting. And Stephen will also be speaking on this at 2 upcoming meetings. So this is a partial presentation, if I understand that right, because it's really long.
Yeah,
right.
that is correct. And Ty-Ben, if you could bring up my other, there we go. Yeah, we're actually going to be requesting 2 actions today. One is to provide comments and endorse and eventually recommend, I should say, to the full MAPC the recommended forecast that I'll be presenting. There are 2 other components that go along with this, so it'll actually be, all 3 of those things that we end up sending to the full Planning Commission later, and I'll go over that in the schedule. But the second item is schedule an additional meeting or meetings beyond the standard monthly advanced plans committee meetings in order to cover these, and I'll go through that a little bit further. So next slide. Why do we need an update? Well, the 2020 census provides us a good measuring point to check the current forecast performance. Review of the 2020 census shows that we had a very complete census here in Sedgwick County. We didn't find holes or problems that you sometimes hear in the media about others. So we feel very confident with the 2020 census in terms of being a measuring point. Next slide. Public Works, the current forecast does not greatly affect utility rates in terms of short-term planning, but they say better numbers are always better. Where it really does impact is long-range plans like the sewer and water master plan, and they're getting ready to do that again, and they say, please, please give us new numbers. Next slide. WAMPO, they have kind of a 2-tiered system in terms of their plans. Their long-range transportation plan is something that it is updated every 5 years, and they say, well, it's easy to adjust if our forecast was wrong. But where the rubber really meets the road is on the budgetary side, where they say an accurate forecast has more impact on budgetary elements because many communities are competing for the same dollars. That's true for the Transportation Improvement Program and their Unified Planning Work Program. Next slide. Things we looked at several models using decennial census data from going back to 1970. And basically looking at these confirmed along with the 2020 census being input that the current comp plan forecast is way too high. The problem with looking at those, though, is the historical trends don't factor in changes in the community and the economy as well. So next slide. Another thing we looked at was national and state population 2020 to 2030 forecasts from the U.S. Census Bureau, WSU Center for Economic Development and Business Research. And they're basically saying we foresee a 7% increase in population for the nation over the next decade, 6% for the state, and locally 6 to 7%. Next slide. In terms of economic forecasts looking out to 2030, where they look at birth rates, immigration, and other factors that drive the economy, they expect current economic productivity to continue through 2030 about where they are. And I will say that even though there's a lot of talk about recession, only one of 6 factors has seen recent declines for more than 1 month. The rest of the economy is still really strong. So there's a lot of noise in the media about recession, but no one is saying we're there or approaching it imminently. Mr. Warren?
Mike, please check.
How do you factor in immigration numbers when it's such an area of flux right now?
These forecasts looked at immigration overall in terms of what happens with the economy as more people come in. And the US, Canada, and Australia are really strong in terms of economic viability compared to a lot of other countries where immigration is much more restricted. You take Japan and Italy, which have very low birth rates, and those economies are in really shaky positions. Other economies like England, which does have a little bit more immigration, but still a low birth rate, their economy is doing better, but the best economies in their world are the US, Canada, and Australia, which have much more immigration. So like the birth rate, if you've got more children being born, that's adding to the economy in terms of what the family has to purchase in order to raise children. But then as those children age and create their own households, that creates another set of factors that help drive the economy. And they're saying that influx that we see in terms of immigration in this country also contributes to those economic productivity drivers. Okay, next slide. Another thing that we really looked at was residential building trends. We know that there are labor market challenges. Part of that being commercial development, which is very strong. We do have a fairly large construction component in the local economy, but it has got some challenges in terms of home building right now. Residential development trends have been very strong for the last 6 years, but there are questions about materials supply, interest rates, and those sorts of things. And I'll be touching more upon this as we get into the forecast numbers. Another thing we looked at, next slide, We don't see any real changes in job growth or labor force participation, and we don't see a change in trends in terms of household sizes and how we projected housing units in the current forecast. COVID did create a blip in the numbers, but as we've kind of coming out of COVID and getting back to normal, whatever that is, we're seeing the overall trends go back to pre-COVID type trends. Next slide. And I'm not going to ask you to look at all these numbers. I'm just saying we looked at several different scenarios with different growth rates. And the numbers that are highlighted and level towards the bottom of each of these just kind of shows where we would hit the population targets we have in the comprehensive plan currently. 610,000 for the county and 448,000 for Wichita. But don't spend, unless you have insomnia, don't spend time with the numbers.
Hey, Stephen, on that slide, is that something that we received as a handout today, or is that?
Yeah, we sent a copy out in the, I think we sent a copy out in the email, but I'll come back to the.
It's too small to read.
Yeah, it's hard to read, but I will be coming to these back to these columns that have the extra highlights above and below, because that is the recommended forecast. But I just want to kind of summarize so far. Next slide. We did look at the current comp plan growth and our forecast, and it is too high. The 2020 census shows that the 2010s were a slow decade. We have some statistics for national, state, and local growth from different sources. We looked at economic growth forecasts. Next slide. We considered residential building environment being tight, and then development trends, though, being pretty strong in the number of housing permits in the last 5 years. And then pre-COVID rates for household size and labor force participation are going back to pre-COVID levels. So given these factors, given these factors, next slide, we're recommending a growth rate of 0.63 per year for Sedgwick County. That is down from the 0.82, and then 0.5% per year for Wichita, we think makes sense. So about 6.3 for the decade and 5% for Wichita for the per decade, taking into account these numbers actually get a little bit compounded, but they're pretty slow growth rates.
Stephen, I'm sorry, can you remind me when we developed the comprehensive plan, what we set that at? Did we set it at 1.5?
The actual rate.
What we aspired, the goal for, I thought we put the goal in the comprehensive plan at 1.5. Maybe it wasn't.
It wasn't quite that high. That was the initial recommendation in the plan steering committee back in like 2012.
Right.
We did show that that would be an enormous number.
Yes.
And so we did work, and it came down in terms of an annual growth rate.
Yes.
0.83% for the county and 0.67% for the city on an annual basis.
So even though we created a stretch goal when we created the comprehensive plan, we've still not as expected, reach that stretch goal.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Cindy,
And
this is Joe. Let me ask you a question. I'm not really sure I want to change that stretch goal at this time, so convince me.
okay. All right. Well, let's
You feel
go
the
to the
same way,
next
Cindy, or
slide.
what?
Let's go to the next slide. And the main column to focus on is the blue and the orange, which is our recommended forecast. But in this, you'll notice the yellow highlight for the county. We're looking at reaching the population of 610,000 around 2044, 2045. It would fall kind of mid-year if things really came to fruition, like these numbers would say.
And Stephen, for those who are following along in the handout, I believe that's on page 2 of the physical copy.
Yes, yeah. And this is the first two columns of what was sent to you. In the orange column, we would reach the 448,000 population in the same time span, 2044 to 2045. Now, I will point out that even with the old forecast, we're showing that if those rates could be applied from here forward, that forecast would be 3 years behind reaching the target. So we'll go to the next slide. The purple highlighted column, that is showing that the percentage of population coming to Wichita, Wichita's percent of Sedgwick County is actually decreasing over time. And that's very important because over time, we are allocating more to the small cities. And that's something that we're just seeing. Our city limits have become common with many cities, and the growth is accelerating in those border communities. Wichita's population right now and housing unit build out is more at 60% compared to a little over 30% for the small cities. And that would be decreasing to 50% for Wichita and increasing to 42% for the small cities, the remainder being in the rural areas. And that's just what we're seeing happen with more and more subdivision activity and build out in places like Mays and Goddard, Derby. Andover, of course, has also seen some of that, but Wichita does have a lot of a growth area. We're not hemmed in like a lot of other communities. And Wichita has the great fortune to be a big job center, with the fact that there are other school districts within Wichita city limits and a lot of parochial schools that people have other choices in terms of the schools, and those are still factors that drive decisions. But Wichita, I think, really has a great fortune in that, as far as people still seeking to be closer in overall. And we are seeing some of the outlying communities, places like Mount Hope, Clearwater, even Cheney, where growth has been kind of tapering off. Next slide. This is pretty important here because I mentioned Wichita and Sedgwick County kind of falling behind even with the current forecast as a result of how slow 2010 was. It would take a production starting now of nearly 2,300 housing units per year to actually make that forecast happen. We're not there. Our forecast, and it's shown under the revised, the recommended forecast in the blue and orange or yellow columns, that we're at about 1,800 housing units per year over the last 6 years. We have had as high as over 2,800. That was back in 2004. But we had a low of 400 in 2011. So, you know, you all know it fluctuates here. So to have a very high number, like 2,300, and try to make that actually happen when you know there's going to be downturns, you know, how do you catch up to that? And so looking at where the housing unit numbers are, the recommended forecast puts us in at the averages where we have been for the last 6 months. That gives us some wiggle room if we have a downturn. There is capacity in the overall construction community to get back to that 2,800. We'll just have to see what happens after we stop building car washes on every arterial corner. That's the housing unit side of this. Jobs, next slide. The jobs are actually derived from labor force participation, and we're not seeing that is going to change dramatically over time. We had a blip with COVID. Yes, there are some challenges in a lot of people finding workers, but what we found, there's quite a bit of evidence that we're at or very near pre-COVID employment levels, but people have shifted in terms of the jobs they want. A lot of people have made decisions about, I don't want to be in this particular sector, or I'm seeking a better income and so forth. So there are factors at play there, but in terms of labor force participation, we are seeing it get back to normal. So the next slide. In terms of these two byproducts, dwelling units and jobs and employment, we don't really see much change in the numbers. We're not forecasting that, except that it's a shift in the time frame from 2035 to 2045 in this forecast. Next slide. The third component is the future growth concept map, and we will be updating this, bringing it up to date. Next slide, please. With 10 years of activity, we want to get that reflected with the base land use that is shown in the map, and there will be some minor modifications to the growth areas, but we're basically accommodating the same population. Some of those will have to do with some analysis we do in terms of freeway improvements and so forth, where will some shifts occur in that respect. But I will be presenting at the next meeting a couple of maps that show actually where development has occurred in relation to these growth areas, and how some of that really shakes out. Next slide. The fourth element is, or fourth byproduct is the financial forecast. And we will project that forward 10 years to 2045. And in terms of the needs for infrastructure for accommodating growth in population, it means we have more time to do that for the target population of 610,000 for the county and 448 for the city. And we'll work with the finance department on expanding the forecast and doing some adjustments to the forecast that they had. If you will recall, the community investments plan had over $10 billion deficit showing in the infrastructure in terms of what would be needed to accommodate the population to 2035. Having 10 more years will give us more time to cover that and reduce that deficit down. My quick analysis of that showed us cutting that in about half, but we'll get with the finance department and go over the numbers a little more thoroughly. Next slide. This is the schedule we're working on. We're looking at 3 advanced plans meetings for going over all of these components for a comprehensive plan update. Today we're looking at the forecast and the scheduling of an extra meeting. We would come back on September 1st to look at the future growth concept map. And then we're proposing September 15th for the financial forecast. And then looking at scheduling with the MAPC to set a hearing date on that same date. We could give this presentation as a quick overview and introduction to the Planning Commission, have them set the hearing, and we're proposing that be on October 13th. Next slide. After that, we will be going to the DABs and CABs in October and November with a thought of going to the City Council for their endorsement and adoption of the new update, and go to the Board of County Commissioners on the 7th. And the one thing that's kind of driving this, the elephant is in the room, is my retirement. You know, right at the beginning of December. Next slide. Any thoughts or questions?
I guess we'll say, Mr. Johnson, did that appease your need to keep the goal, just delay it a tad, or do you have additional questions for Stephen?
I know we had a lot of discussion, and I don't want to just change it without input from the committee that set the goals, would be my thought.
Okay, questions for Stephen or thoughts about what you've just heard? John?
Well, I know in the development community, the small cities around the city of Wichita have gotten a lot more competitive with the things that they offer to the development community for single family or even commercial. I know 2 or 3 businesses have left the area here and gone to like Mays or to some of the others, Goddard or some of those, because they were getting, you know, tax breaks of some sort or doing all kinds of things for them that the city didn't seem to want to do. I don't know if that's been factored into some of these figures or not, because it's really a marketing deal more than it is number deal. So just, I think that's one of the things that it's hard to pinpoint.
Yeah, it is hard to pinpoint. And one thing, Amazon landing in Park City is another kind of example of that. Is it a blip? You know, if we saw more of that over time, then, you know, some of the employment in the county overall, you know, we could see shifting. How much of that, you know, do you see people actually changing where they live? I don't know. At this time, it's not become enough of a trend that we can measure it. There are kind of blips here and there, and we'll just have to watch over time, you know, in terms of what is happening. I think what I would say is Amazon's facility is going to create a lot of jobs at that facility. That's also going to create a lot of jobs in terms of delivery service that won't even be quartered there. They'll go there to pick up packages and so forth, but some of those people may be going out to Liberal, Kansas or someplace, you know, to actually do deliveries, and they wouldn't. So you'll see some job creation in other places besides there.
Well, you know, Amazon's one of them, but I can think of another. Park City has landed 2 or 3 nice, you know, love box that used to be on 37th Street. Just moved their facility over there, and it's almost as big as Amazon's.
Yes.
And so that's got to have some kind of geographical impact on housing and everything for these smaller communities.
Yeah, yeah, and we're just gonna have to measure that over time and see how much of a shift it makes. Are there other facilities that have a similar impact? I know Clearwater just built a facility that's also near 1 million square feet, but it's for cotton warehousing, and that may not be a big number of jobs, sort of like the very large grain silos. It's a big capacity, but it doesn't mean a great number of jobs.
But it means a tax base for the place it's located.
Oh, it does, definitely. Yeah, yes, yeah, definitely that component.
All I can say if the developers would remind people that those nice, lovely developments around the edge that have water features, et cetera, also have wasps and snakes, they would probably keep more people in the urban core.
You know, we didn't say much about the school system, but that's what's been driving this for the last 25 to 30 years. Is the school systems that have developed. Look at Mays. Mays was a little bitty small town, and it's got the largest, I think, probably the largest school district or system in the state of Kansas now. It's one of the largest. And Goddard's the same way, and so Andover, and you know,
But they built their large campus, and it now includes 2 middle schools in Wichita, because that's where the locus of all the new development in terms of that school district is actually happening. Mays does have several subdivisions now that they're doing, and they're doing a lot more multifamily than they used to, which is between Mays and Derby. Those are really the only 2 where urbanization has come to the point of actually making apartment complexes in higher demand.
All right, other thoughts, questions for Stephen, or are we ready to take action, which would be basically to approve the schedule and accept the additional meeting in September. Thank you. I should know you would have a slide for the words we need to use.
Yeah.
Move to take the recommended action.
Second.
We have a motion, Mr. Warren, a second from Ms. Miles. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Hearing none, we have approved this action, and make sure to put your meeting on the September 21st on the calendar for 10:30. All right. Thank you very much, Stephen, for all your work on this and for getting it done before you leave us. Do you know how many hours that is? Have you calculated yet?
I'm not down to calculating
That's
hours.
Okay. There is an app for that, by the way. Anyway.
Well, yeah. I've got another deal on my phone too. I could do it, but there's so much going on, not just this, but the redistricting thing and so forth, that would be too much a novelty to mess with right now.
I hope you're feeling very needed, Stephen, in your final days. You're having a great impact. Alrighty. You received in advance written planning department updates that I'm sure you spent some good time analyzing and reviewing. So maybe we can just begin by saying, what questions do you have for the information that was presented in advance? I guess one of my questions on your staffing, your department staffing, I just continue to have the concern of the overwhelm your staff must feel with lots of cases and positions not filled. So when you get to 100% staffed, Mr. Wadle, Director Wadle, do you feel like the department will be comfortable? We have one position on hold. Can you kind of tell us what your thinking is along those lines?
It's a good question, and I think the answer is it depends. And part of the reason for that is because there's so much volatility in staffing nowadays. The other reason too is because there's volatility in what has been the bulk of our work most recently, which has been current plans cases. But in looking at that, if things were relatively stable, we've submitted a request for 2 additional planning positions. So even if we were to achieve 100% full employment here, I still believe that we need that capacity of the additional 2 positions. And that's what our request has been to the county and to the city. And part of the case that I would make for that is to look at in the past 2 years what our caseloads have been, not only on current plans, especially on that side, but also on advanced plans, because as we work on more projects, it seems like we get assigned additional projects that come forward. So we have multiple items that you can see in the report, such as daycares, nightclubs, looking at duplexes and designs. There's just a lot of things that we're kind of riding herd on right now. Now, one thing that I would say with a caveat to that, though, is although we have requested the 2 positions, I've made the commitment that we're going to look hard and carefully before we make any hiring for those positions if the funding is programmed for those, simply because we've seen a lot in the news, like Stephen has indicated, about the housing market, and I want to keep a careful eye on what that might do for our caseload, because certainly we're not going to staff up if we don't need them, but at the same time, I know that we can definitely use them at this point.
All right. I think the project list, its length, and the fact that some of these have taken some time to get through is, really reflective of your staffing, and recognizing you also have some new players which take training and probably have reduced productivity. So on the project updates, you want to quickly talk us through, we'd probably be ready to look at short-term or what we'll be looking at coming down the pike. Let's just let you answer those questions.
Sure, I'm more than happy to give you a preview. Advanced plans, we are so fortunate to have you all, and thank you again for serving in this role. And we've got a number of things that we would like to bring to you and bounce off of you and kind of see what your thoughts are. The first, well, short-term rentals, we don't have really much to do on that one yet. We're still working on that. We've got a work in product that we're working on. Solar regulations we'd like to bring to you. Nightclubs in the city, we'd like to bring that one to you so that you can see the feedback that we've received so far. So solar will really be, here's what our draft is. What do you think about it? Is it ready to go out for public comment? The nightclubs will be, this is where we've taken it out. These are the comments that we've received. Do we need to do any changes to it? And then places for people, there's been an ongoing conversation about duplexes and designs. And so there's a request and a desire by the city council to get your feedback on whether or not it's appropriate to include in the staff report a recommendation for design considerations. And so what I would like to do is have a conversation with you about a process, a draft process, how we might map that out, see about who and how to invite folks and what format. And it doesn't have to be very complicated, but I at least want to go through that conversation with you and talk about next steps and how we would move forward in that conversation. And I think those are the biggies, but I do anticipate there'll be, you know, a fair amount of conversation as we go over those items. Oh, and another one that has come up recently too that we probably ought to have a dialogue on is the city council has requested that we look at the notification area for current plans cases. And so we can expect that that will be another one. That's not included in the updates because it's not an initiative that we're currently working on. We just know that that's one that's been requested. So we'd like to have a chat with you on that.
And daycares, something about daycares come up.
Thank you for the reminder. Yes, daycares are another one. City council has asked that we look into that. We've got some proposed changes to the unified zoning code. So we'd like to run that by you and see if you're comfortable with those or what tweaks need to be made. And if you're comfortable with us taking it out for additional input. And the gist of that is that state regulations, this is really on home occupancy ones, so daycares operated out of a residence. The state allows more children than what we allow. And so there's been a request that we would increase the amount of children to match up with the state. So it'll be a good conversation. Yeah, I think part of the dialogue that comes up and is that at the DAB meetings, folks have, you know, members of the public will come in and they'll say, well, I didn't find out about this, or I didn't receive a notice, and why didn't I receive a notice? And that's a common statement that is made at the DAB. And so one of the things I think that we're going to do to help address that is if we can include slides that show what the notification area is. Because it's one thing to say 200 feet or 350 feet, but I think having that graphic will really help. But I think part of a larger question is, well, should it be expanded and to what degree? And so what we'd like to do is have a conversation with you about that, about, well, if we did expand it, here are some options that we looked at, and here's how much it would cost to get the notification area. Here's the implications that it would do for a protest area and just all those kind of dynamics, and just kind of have an initial discussion with you about that.
We had a zoning case last year. It was to replat the land I live on so we could add a house. And the sign went up, but I always leave my house and turn to the left, and the sign was to the right. It was within 200 feet, but I never saw the sign. So, you know, I think we are creatures of habit.
And that
you don't see it because you aren't looking that direction.
I've been around here a couple days, and most generally, when that excuse is used, I didn't know, because it's exactly what you're saying, is that people don't, that's not in their daily scheduling. And so unless they're looking for it, if somebody has told them, they can drive right by it and never see it. You know, for example, that we had 2 or 3 people. I lived on the east side of town, and along Webb Road where they had that fence, you know, they must have had 20 signs on that fence. And we had 3 people say, I didn't see it. Well, you had to be blind. You could see it with a walking cane. I mean, that's how many, really, there must have been 10 or 15 signs along that fence. but people were saying I didn't see it.
I do. When we built 75 habitat homes in a square half mile. And I would walk the blocks, you know, to talk to all the existing neighbors to say, we're going to have construction trucks. And, you know, if trash blows, here's my cell phone. It was amazing to me as you go into the next block. So we built 10 houses in the block behind you. And when we get to your block, they had no idea what a habitat house was or there were any new ones in the neighborhood. It's like we are so restricted to what's right here. It's amazing to me. So, you know, notification, good luck.
Well, it opens up a whole dialogue. And again, that is why I'm so appreciative of the time and the effort that you do to participate in these conversations. Another thing to look at too will be that right now the notifications per state law go to the property owners. Should they also go to the properties themselves so that if someone was renting there, that they would receive it?
I love that one.
It does. It will be a challenge. And that's why, again, I am so glad that you all are here. It will be a balance, that's for sure. Notification versus the expense and the time. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. That's why we love that we have staff that get to make these recommendations and figure it out, right?
You know,
okay.
One
yes.
more thing. On this thing here, one thing that we did not talk about, this notification thing is, you know, I can remember back when we had some subdivisions that they wanted to take some lots and make them into duplexes. And the restricted covenant said, well, you can't do that. So that was part of the problem. And you go down through there and you couldn't rent property. I'm thinking Falcon Falls more than anything else up by Heights. You know, they said you can't. And if you go through there and probably 10 to 15% of the houses that people were living in were rentals. And it's against all the rules that you weren't supposed to do it. And so, you know, homeowners association didn't adhere to it. So that's you know, you can't legislate common sense.
Yes. Some profundity from John McKay today. Can't make sure that gets in the minutes too. Can't legislate common sense. And enforcement is much too expensive. That's any other questions or comments on the project updates? We will have actions necessary on quite a few of these coming down the pike. At this point, do you believe our meeting schedule is going to be adequate, or do we need to plan for an extra meeting? I know comprehensive plan, Stephen is gone in August, and that's why the second meeting, the two meetings would be in September rather than August. Also giving him a little more time to be prepared for those two. But August, are we cool with today's meeting, or do you feel like for the other updates, we should try something in the second half of this month?
You know, another option too would be to have a slightly longer meeting in September, if you're willing to do that as part of your first meeting, knowing that a second meeting then will be to talk about the comprehensive plan items. Because knowing that we would be talking about notification, that we would be talking about daycares and nightclubs, the risk is I don't want to bore you too. I mean, I know an hour and a half long meeting is a long meeting, and I know, you know, extending to go a little bit longer, I don't want it to be monotonous, but at the same time, I think we would have a really good dialogue, and so I don't want to have to cut it short. So I would look to you to see, are you open to the idea of maybe starting instead of 10:30, even at 10 o'clock, so we could get an additional 30 minutes? Or I guess, what do you feel?
Okay. Recommendation to meet the first meeting of September, which is the 1st, I believe, would start at 10 o'clock. So we'd have 2 hours, allowing us to go through some of the project updates or recommendations in more detail. And then we'd have a second meeting in September as well. Could I hear acceptance of that, or second on that motion, I guess? Mr. Hartman, second. All in favor of that, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, we have a schedule for September. I'm going to say I did. Is that acceptable? Alrighty. And then, pardon me? Oh, I'm just exerting as much power as I possibly can in these meetings. Whether you call me chairperson or chairman or anything. Do we have anyone who would like to make public comment at this time? We would offer up 3 minutes if there's anyone who would like to speak. No one in chambers. I'm hearing nothing from the online gallery, and my eyes can't see if there's anyone in the public in the online gallery. One person. Any comment? Thanks for joining us today, and I hope you heard something interesting. That concludes our agenda, unless there would be other business to be raised. Hearing none, I would call this meeting to its conclusion, and we'll see you at 10 o'clock on Thursday, September 1st at this location. Thanks, everyone.
I hope we see some of you this afternoon.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise, we could be lacking a quorum.
Good point, Cindy. Thank you. Have a great couple hours until we meet again.